So, my group managed to do the impossible. We finished a level 20 5e game. This game, or series of games I should say, has spanned over 3 campaigns, and has been the source of every single D&D story that I've shared so far. Copper Bullies the Elderly, for instance, was the very first game, and the first 5e game that I actually played, where I brought in my Dragonborn fighter Lishna. In that game, the goal was to basically stop the city from falling into the Shadowfell due to some kind of planar anchor that was being established. That one ended prematurely due to scheduling issues. The second game, however, was where I brought in my Wood Elf Druid, Sains, who had spores growing in her brain. The party in that game had been framed for basically causing a giant fire in the city, and we had to basically clear our names and stop an assassination. But by far the longest leg, and the most impactful one, was the final leg of it. That game started immediately where the previous one had ended, and we were able to bring in our old characters if we so desired. That said, Moss and I decided to bring in some new ones, or sort of new. I decided to bring back Lishna, and finish the game with the one that I started with. There is a lot to cover in this campaign. It's involved numerous plot points, such as fighting and routing out an underground Yuan-Ti city that was threatening to take over the capital, ending a war between 2 huge nations, one of which was led by a dragon, killing an ancient blue dragon, globetrotting around to fight and kill a necromancer who was stealing the body of his old mentor. As part of that, raiding a giant animated wizard's tower, traveling around the countries to unearth several artifacts that could be used to open up an ancient civilization, only to find that the individuals inside it were still alive, just petrified, and could be cured, and working with them to stop a prophecy of an evil god being summoned into the world, which he was summoned, and then thusly killing him in the final fight, among a host of other things, including finding the ruins of an old crashed spaceship, which wound up picking up a lot of things for a huge chunk of history. This campaign was named Kinslayer, and it has been one of the most engaging and deep campaigns that I have ever participated in. Spencer is a phenomenal DM and a phenomenal writer. I'd taken a poll to ask people what they think I should cover for this video, and thinking on it, it's very difficult to satiate any of the suggestions that I was given. People wanted me to cover all the major plot points, but with how widely spanning this campaign was, that would be a minimum of maybe like 15 videos. I don't want to make 15 videos on this. I'm not Dingo Doodles. I'm sorry, guys. I got other things I got to work on. I also could cover the final battle, but it wouldn't have as much impact without all the context surrounding it. So instead, I think the easiest thing and the best thing to do is to cover the characters and the party, which we had 6 people in the party, so pretty sizable. Also, I think it's pretty fitting considering that I'm drawing a party picture here. Anyway, starting with things. Sigrid was a human grave cleric of Kelemvor, an older and eccentric woman played by Jess. Kelemvor, for those who don't know, is the god of the dead. He's a lawful neutral god who basically, he makes sure that things stay dead after they die, and that people die at the right time. Her personal tie-in for the story wound up being one of the biggest plot points in the game. Her initial job was performing the last rites for a slain paladin on the front lines in the war between the nations of Nexus and Centra, with our party being from Nexus, or situated in Nexus at least. When we finally arrived to the front line, we found that the body had been stolen by a necromancer named Farron Edelwise, which wound up spiraling into a long, country-trotting chase, going from lair to lair, even into the wizard tower of his old master Skyril, that he was only able to take over by literally hijacking Skyril's old corpse. For the record, Skyril was actually still alive. The best way to describe Sigrid, imagine a quirky grandma who wore gothic armor decorated with skeletons. That's Sigrid. A bit while after finally ending Edelweiss, we were able to end the war between Nexus and Centra as well. The Emperor of Nexus was actually an ancient black dragon known as Asinexus, who had been turned lawful good by the Deck of Many Things. For routing out the previous Yuan-Ti infestation from the city, he had given us all a boon. Sigrid had actually been saving hers, and if it weren't for her, we wouldn't have even been able to get him to come to the peace talks table. For tracking down and bringing Farron to justice, and stopping a ritual to bring Orcus into the world, Sigrid had become one of Kelemvor's closest. Her quirkiness and unorthodox approaches were never second-guessed by the rest of her clergy, as they knew that she had a direct line to Kelemvor. Edgar Pritchard, meanwhile, is probably going to be many people's favorite. He was a human Hexblade Warlock, one you may recognize as I had done a video on him before. Edgar was a naive, trusting, and rather unsettling little lad with his black carapace armor and a halberd that, up until the last few sections, was constantly oozing black slime. He got along well with such a frightening entity due to his ability to see the good in everyone and his inability to even recognize that there was anything wrong. Edgar was an investigator for the city of Athvalum, the capital of Nexus, and was often the first person in the party to be informed of any missing persons or any big plot points that we needed to check out. As a party member, he was a potent powerhouse, able to lock down targets with Polearm Master and Sentinel, and blow them up with critical hit Eldritch Smites with an expanded crit range, while also having several abilities like Psychic Scream, which he even used to blow the head off of Irisville, the ancient blue dragon that I had mentioned before. That actually got us an in with Centra, so that way we could actually start the peace talks in the first place. Eventually, by the end, we actually were able to speak directly to Kelemvor through Sigrid's help. The god granted Edgar a favor and cleansed the infection that was plaguing Visra, his weapon. The kindness that Edgar had shown to Visra up to this point was finally repaid with genuine affection, as the spear finally donned a raven motif. Orven, meanwhile, was Moss's character to replace his old orc druid. Orven was a Warforged artillerist artificer, a prolific technician who crafted many of the items the party used. Warforged in this world came from a far-off land known as Sondor, which was ruled by elves. The Warforged were made to fight in their own wars, which, upon the conclusion of, they decided that they should deactivate their constructs out of fear of them uprising against them. Orven, along with a sparse few others, had managed to escape during or before the massacre. Eventually, when the party made it to Centra, we met one of his old companions, named Warlowen. He was manufacturing a super weapon for Centra in their War of Nexus, or should I say, weapons. Warlowen had come into contact with some curious inventions that he found in his travels, and they had enabled him to unlock the secrets of gunpowder. He had reverse engineered something he had found, and was able to operate an assembly line to mass-produce firearms not just for Centra, but for the world. His entire goal at the end was to supply these weapons everywhere in the world in hopes that eventually they would reach Sondor and bring annihilation to their nation. That all said, despite being on Centra's paycheck, we found that he had sabotaged their food supply in order to spurn them into the war with Nexus. And, when the truth came out, it was only by Orven's insistence that he still be spared. It's hard to not undersell what Orven went through in the game by the end, as there are some moments in there that I don't actually want to spoil because I might do a video on it sometime in the future. Who knows? One of the items that we had requiesced from Warlowen actually happened to be a special item known as the Staff of the Orbiter. To give a little bit of a context and teaser as to what I mean, the Staff of the Orbiter was sort of a magical weapon, but also a little bit mundane, in the sense that it actually could call down a literal orbital bombardment. Where that came from, I might leave for a story for another time. This is probably also as good a time as any to mention one of the key items granted to the party from Skyrel. It was a small clockwork bird that, when pressed, would unfold into a larger airship. And as we pumped more spell slots and gold into it, it would get bigger and bigger. Orven was mainly the custodian and pilot for it. By the end of the game, it eventually had acquired sentience of its own, as it reached its final form, and while it was loyal to the entire party, it was especially loyal to Orven, due to the care he had shown for it, and probably also due to the fact that they were both constructs in a way. Saurella should be another familiar name, a Tiefling Bard Rogue hybrid, specifically College of Whispers and Mastermind, respectively. She had appeared in the previous campaign with Edgar, and was an agent for the Church of the Ibis, a spy organization within Athvalum, and Lionsgate. While Edgar would receive official reports regarding plot points, Saurella would receive assignments dealing with more insidious and covert matters, such as sabotage, subterfuge, and dealing with treason and traitors. She was the one who had received the assignment of journeying to Centra to disable their super weapon, which, after finding that the Necromancer was an issue, resulted in a very split party, much to Spencer's chagrin. This was resolved by making side characters. Sal's player created a rogue, a swashbuckler, to fill in for her while she was absent. Meanwhile, everyone else made side characters to join Sal in her adventures, a band of thieves that she would hire when she arrived in Centra. The highlight of that entire scenario was the vault break-in. That's something that deserves its own video, to be totally honest. Basically, Sal and the group needed to sneak in to the vault below the palace itself during a party. The execution was very carefully orchestrated, and there was a ton of great RP moments in that. And Spencer wrote a very, very intricate and very well-made riddle for that entire scenario. As said, I probably should do a video on that itself. One thing that was also kind of curious about Sal, and the temp villain that joined the main party for a time, Sal was replaced with a swashbuckler rogue named Gesh. Gesh was charismatic, a celebrity, and an actor. And he was much more of a bard than Sal ever was, despite having no levels in bard. He wasn't exceptionally stealthy, instead taking expertise in performance. Sal, meanwhile, was incredibly secretive and deceptive, with expertise in deception and stealth, naturally, and was far more rogue than bard, despite the fact that she was mostly bard in levels. It's just kind of funny how that all worked out. Shashana, meanwhile, was our sorcerer, Draconic sorcery with silver dragon's blood. She specialized in ice magic and came from a land that had been eradicated by the blue dragon Erisville, not far from the capital city of Centra. Erisville being the ancient blue dragon that we all eventually slayed. After dealing with the Yuan-Ti city beneath Althvalum, Asinexus had granted everyone a favor that they could redeem. Shashana asked for any headway on her family history. The Emperor pointed her in the direction of Celestar's Crown, where we were all able to meet Sylvanas Stormcrowned, a silver dragon and Shashana's grandmother. She actually challenged us to a duel as a test, which it's not very often that you get to fight an ancient silver dragon, which is pretty cool. Once she was satisfied with her fighting ability, she bestowed upon Shashana part of her fundamentum, an elemental core that exists within all dragons. This unlocked Shashana's full heritage, enabling her to, at will, transform into a silver dragon, even granting her immunity to the cold. Shashana was integral in ending the war between Nexus and Centra as well, as Asinexus, being a egotistical black dragon, despite being lawful good, would only listen to the words of another dragon. It also helped that Shashana had history as a mediator prior to becoming an adventurer. As she was able to meet the requirement of dragon now, she was able to act as a mediator during negotiations, one that Asinexus was obligated to respect. Lishna, meanwhile, was my character, a Dragonborn Battlemaster fighter, with a few levels in Ranger, enough to get Gloomstalker anyway. She prided herself on her strength and would throw herself into the thick of battle without a moment's notice. She was my first 5e character ever, and was who I used in the very first game that I played in of this campaign, the one that involved Copper Bullies the Elderly. She came from a small town near the Free Coast and wanted to set out to try and bring glory back home. Though the first campaign ended prematurely, what wound up happening, she was the one to destroy the anchor that was tying the land to the Shadowfell. However, in the process, this actually locked her in the Shadowfell itself. By the start of the third campaign, she had only just made it back. The boon she received from Asinexus was the Seed of Dragonkind, which actually infused her Dragonborn blood with some draconic features, granting her wings in flight. This came with a drawback of -1 AC, which Spencer implemented because I was extremely tanky, thanks to Orven's infusions. Her foray into the underground to rout out the Yuan-Ti had sharpened her tracking skills, getting her started on the path to a ranger. When we headed to the northern mountains to meet with Sylvanas, she was given the opportunity to pull an ancient sword from a stone, a task only made possible by the assistance of her friends. Thanks, Flash of Genius and Bardic Inspiration and Guidance. Those DC 35 checks wouldn't be possible without you. The sword was known as Celestar's Silver Scimitar, a scimitar with Bane Evil imbued into it. For anyone unworthy, holding it would immediately cause their hands to frost over with frostbite. Despite being so danger-minded, she managed to go the whole game without dying, at least up until the very final fight. Sesenek, the lizardfolk demon lord of destruction, had been summoned into the world, as we were just too late to stop the ritual. He wielded several swords, one of which was Vorpal. Which one he used was random each turn, but we had him on the ropes for a time. Near the end, however, he became enraged and started striking every strike with advantage, and started favoring his Vorpal sword more. He was able to get a lucky crit on Lishna, and decapitated her in one foul swing, 202 HP down to nothing in an instant. She awoke in Isgard, hailed there as a hero for standing against an evil god and helping save the realm. Her allies were soon to avenge her, defeating Sesenek a few turns later. Before long, there was a knock at the door of the mead hall. She was being called back to the material plane, a day later. It had to be a day later because everybody was kind of out of spell slots, and we also needed to use regeneration to get my head stitched back on, you know how it goes. One of the benefits of having a level 20 party, reports of your death tend to be greatly exaggerated. And that's everyone. Sigurd wound up going on to become a Reaper for Kelemvor in the afterlife. Orven, he continued to live on, journeying around, taking Orloan with him, and showing him that, hey, there's more to live for, and that some of their people had actually survived. Saurella went on to found a family, as well as train a new protege to take her place, dying at old age when one of her grandkids decided to spook her and gave her a heart attack. Shashana was able to live as a dragon, her lifespan greatly extended by this process, and worked with Queen Alexandra to rebuild the lands that they had been driven from long, long ago. Edgar, a Nexian noble, actually wound up marrying the princess of Centra. Like Saurella, he also started a family. However, he mysteriously vanished one day, leaving only his spear behind. And Lishna used her training as a ranger to help homestead for a displaced group of lizard folk that had been cautious and worried about the prophecy of Sessanek returning into the world. She used this training to help come home and eventually take up the mantle of chieftain at her clan's village. After choosing a successor near the end of her life, she journeyed back the way up to Celestar's crown, on foot, not flying, and replanted Celestar's scimitar back into the stone so that way the next hero may take it when ready. Far above the mountaintops, above the clouds, she sat, desensitized to the freezing air. She saw the sun peek up above the clouds, and let out a long, satisfied sigh. It was finally time for her to return to Isgard.